Hello, you magnificent bastards. Glad you tuned in. Today's topic is the gender wage gap. Well, technically it is. Honestly, I would rather like to talk about the discussion surrounding the gender wage gap because I think that the internet could do a lot better than that. Because for some reason the internet is so ridiculously polarized on this issue that you can't even have a proper debate about it anymore. On the one hand, you have the yes men and women of the world who completely and blindly accept any notion of a gender wage gap across the world and basically treat it as a form of religious dogma even. People who are so adamant and so loud and so outspoken about it that they even managed to convince the President of the goddamn United States about it. People who almost religiously worship the number 77%. Now, on the other hand, you have people who are so adamantly opposed to any kind of wage gap around the world at any given time, at any given period, at any given government, that they flat out reject any kind of empirical finding of a gender wage gap. Maybe by saying that it comes from a biased source, even though clearly not coming from a biased source. Maybe saying that the source itself is invalid, even though it's not invalid. And basically trying everything they can to discredit any attempt at establishing a gender wage gap. And even if you manage to find some proper and good empirical findings about the gender wage gap, you will basically be only labeled a socialist, communist, feminist, regressive, totalitarian propaganda master who wishes only for the end of Western civilization. And that is not a good climate to have a debate about something. Now, I'm not going to say that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, because it clearly does not, but what I'm going to say is that both sides are wrong on this issue. Not equally wrong, of course not, but they are both wrong. Really fucking wrong. This simple-minded ideological approach to the gender wage gap on the internet really kind of baffles me. Even people who are otherwise pretty open-minded and very data-driven fall for this ideological trap. In their worldview, it just doesn't work out. There can't be a gender wage gap. And suggesting it means only that you are a social justice warrior. The problem is that even people, on both sides of the argument mind you, that claim to have a very thorough expertise even on this issue, way too often fail to account for even the most basic variables, to be honest, such as the geographic location of their claim or the time period of their claim. When discussing the gender wage gap, it is way too often too hazy, essentially. People talk about it as it is a global phenomenon that exists everywhere at any given time, and that is like a monolithic structure even. The thing is, if you start conflating even as much as a possible gender wage gap in Eastern Europe to a possible gender wage gap in the United States, if you start conflating those two discussions, you will get only one thing out of it: absolute nonsense. So you have to be very specific from the get-go. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be focusing on the United States of the last few years. Okay, with all of that said, do me a favor, take your mouse and hover it over the dislike button. I hope you're ready, because I'm going to break a holy taboo on the internet. The gender wage gap is real. Now, hear me out, right? The gender wage gap in the United States of America is real, but also much smaller than any left-wing radical would have you believe, and also, we don't actually know where it's coming from. Well, we have established a very big chunk of the gender wage gap, and spoiler, it's because of life decisions such as education, work experience, and the type of degree the person earned, but the tiny rest that is still remaining, the remaining 5 to 8%, we don't fully know yet, so saying it's because of sexism, doesn't work out. And as long as we don't have any conclusive data about the tiny rest of the gender wage gap we cannot explain, well, we should reserve any statements about it, you know? And just as a note, simply saying that the gender wage gap exists doesn't mean that I have any opinion on it existing. Just because you measure a phenomenon and establish the existence of a phenomenon doesn't mean you have an opinion on the phenomenon. In fact, it doesn't even imply any origins of the phenomenon. All I'm saying here is there is a measured gender wage gap in the United States. And let's find out why together. And for that purpose, I brought you one of the most up-to-date, in-depth papers about the gender wage gap. It's called The Gender Wage Gap: Extent, Trends and Explanations by Blau and Kahn. And as always, you can find the download link in the description. And if not, yeah, kick my ass. Descriptions for some reason don't really work with me. Now, if we look at the findings of the paper, and please keep in mind the paper is 79 pages long, so yeah, All I can give you is a very, very shallow look into it. If we look at the findings of the paper, we actually get some fantastic insights about the gender wage gap. Let's start with figure 2, specifically the year 1998. And if you've been a careful viewer, there's a really familiar number, isn't there? 77%. That's one of the most evil numbers in existence, if you ask me. It's one of the numbers that really swayed the opinions and hearts of an entire generation of people, so yeah, don't like it. That's just, an opinion on the side. I think I should cut this out when I'm editing the video. I don't like ranting and rambling in my own videos, nah. The main problem with this number, leaving out any kind of personal opinion, is that the number is not adjusted. Basically meaning that the entire aggregate men is being compared to the entire aggregate women, which in turn means that it has very little actual meaning. You are essentially comparing a male, lifelong manager PhD to a young, starting out, uneducated waitress. Now, if we look at the adjusted wage gap of the same year, we'll suddenly find the number 91.4%, a much better number. And all you had to do was to look at stuff like education, work experience, and the type of degree. And even then, keep in mind that this paper does actually not account for children and marital status, something that in my personal experience would reduce the unexplained wage gap even more. Now, if we move to a more recent year, the year 2010, we'll find the unadjusted number 79.3% and the adjusted number 91.6%. It's kind of amazing how accounting for a few very simple and kind of obvious even variables already decreases the gender wage gap by 12.3%. It's impressive, isn't it? And again, this is not including children and marital status. The biggest chunk in the difference between wages, aggregate to aggregate compared, comes from those really easy, obvious and understandable factors. For instance, having a bachelor's degree. Women, if we look at table 2, held and still hold less bachelor's degrees than men do. You'll find that historically speaking, and even today, women have less work experience. So it kind of makes sense that on average, women receive less pay. And there are many more factors to all of this. Factors that, if put together, create this gender wage gap. But just having an unadjusted gender wage gap doesn't tell you the full story. As we've established, most of it is due to life choices, education, experience, degree, the field you decide to enter, and many more. And right now, depending on literature, of course, you have a gender wage gap between 5 to 9%, at least the unexplained part so far. That means that 5 to 9% might potentially be due to sexism, which personally I do not believe if this paper already has such a very low, unexplained gender wage gap without even including children or marital status. And the fantastic thing about all of this is the more research is done, the more open the debate is. One of the reasons why I'm even making this ranty video. The more open the debate is, the more we'll find out about the gender wage gap, the more we'll be able to explain it. And the more we are able to explain it, the less hiding room, the less ground essentially will people have who claim that it's basically all due to sexism. Because right now we have 5 to 9% that potentially, hypothetically in the United States right now might be due to sexism, which is an entirely different story than 23%. So please, I understand that you want to fight feminism. I understand even if you want to fight for feminism, but you're doing no one a favor if you're being dishonest about it. Please look at the data, and if I'm wrong, then correct me, right? I'm very happy about being corrected. Look at the data, come to your own findings, and if you label yourself to be a reasonable, open-minded person, a data-driven person, then don't make exceptions just because you have an ideological investment in it. Just because feminists say that the gender wage gap is real, and well, they are feminists, doesn't mean that the wage gap is not real. Do your fucking work. Be rigorous about this. And there you have it. The gender wage gap is and has been historically a phenomenon in the United States, and even though I did not touch upon this in my video, around the world essentially, but it's much smaller than the radical left wing would have you believe, and it's also not due to sexism, at least not dominantly because of sexism. So the next time you're having a debate about the wage gap, don't be afraid about saying that yes, there is a wage gap. There is both an adjusted and an unadjusted wage gap, and neither suggests a grand patriarchal conspiracy against all women around the world. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Dr. Layman, and as always, Babylon prevails.